Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Avodah Zarah daf Nun Vav. We are going to begin on Nun Vav Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top. Ve'enu oise yain nesach ad shior labor. So our Mishnah told us in the previous daf that the only time wine is going to turn into yain nesach is only once it actually reached into the bore. We have two different levels. When a person is preparing wine, so you have on the top a place where you're stepping on the wine, and then there's a tube, which if it's open, we said it was questionable whether or not the issue is only once it actually enters into the gas, the bottom section, but otherwise it's not an issue once it goes into the bottom section, which is the bore. Or is it even when it's at a slant? In other words, on the top level, but once the liquid starts moving in a downward motion, even before it goes into the bore, whether or not that already has the din of yayin. So that's what we were discussing yesterday. And the Gemara says, Bosanya yayin mishiyikpe, that it becomes wine not once it goes only into the bore, or as we said, the second opinion, when it was, again, still above, but it was on a downward slope. But it mentions this other time, mishiyikbe, which means when the sediments begin to ferment to the top. Rashi, and like to float to the top. Rashi says, Havi Gemar Malacha, in Meiser. That's considered to be, it's complete regarding the Chi of Meiser. We aserbo shtias arai, that you're allowed to drink a temporary amount of wine until it actually reaches this step. However, once it reaches the step of mishiyikbe, which is basically what happens, the peels float to the top. It's like separated from the wine. It says Rashi, mishiyikbe lashon saf, like a language of floating. Kamo kapa tahoma the Masechta Sukkah, which is related to when David threw Hashem's name to be able to stop a flood or for the rain to come back, the water to go higher. Should safin hachartzayim al yayin kishu nach babor. Okay. So the question is, we apparently have this other shita. Seva Omarava lo kasha. It's not a question because there's different opinions. Rabbi Kiva Horabanan. We'll see that there are different opinions exactly when something is considered to be wine. Ditnan. Yayin, when is it considered to be yayin? Mishiyar labor, once it's flowing into the pit. Rabbi Kiva Omer Mishiyikbe. This Mishiyikbe, which is actually a later stage. So Iboilhu Kipuyi Debor or Kipuyi Dechavius? Is it the floating of the peels when it's in the bore? Or is it once it's in the barrel? So Tashma Desanya Yayin Mishiyikbe. We said once it called wine, once it reaches this level again of the floating of the peels and sediment, Avopi Shikapa, says Rashi, even though this has taken place, koilet min hagas el yaina, you could still catch the wine from the upper gas, uminat sinor, and from the pipe, v'shaisa, and drink. Shemamina kifoy debor kamrin and shemamina. Obviously, it's not talking about in a barrel, because if it would be in a barrel, then how would you be able to catch it in this way? Says Rashi. Until it hits into the bore, it's not a gemar malacha. Shemamina, says Rashi, keeping the bore kaimer midiktani v'afabi shekafa koilet min hagas. It was koilet min hagas. Di b'chavius ma in yano etzel gas. So if it's talking about the chavius, the barrel, it's in a different place or it's a different stage than the gas. So it's not connected to the gas at all. So why is it mentioning the gas? It must be because it's not talking about kipoy of chavius. It's got to be the bore, which is connected to the gas. Avatani Rab Zvid b'debe Rabbi Ishia yayin mishiyar labor v'yikbe. So it's actually two things. It's the wine is cold wine once it hits the bore, and you also the peels float to the top to separate from the wine. Rabbi Kiva Omer mishi yishla b'chavyos. When it's pulled out, so actually is a shayla, done like pulling out fish. Mishilsa hayayim in a bore. When the wine is taken out from the pit and it's put into a barrel. Says Rashi, inyan katanu rabbanim mishiar lebor. So it's when it comes out of the bore, not when the pieces float to the top. However, Rabbi Kiva mishiyikbeh. Rabbi Kiva is the one who says it's mishiyikbeh. So when we mentioned before, one's Rabbanan, one's Rabbi Kiva. So Rabbi Kiva says mishiyikbeh, and over here he says mishiyishla b'chavius. So how do you answer this? So tirtza nami l'hach kamayisahach. This is how you answer it. Yayin, when is it considered to be wine? Mishiyar lebor v'yikbeh. When again it goes into the bore and the peels float to the separate location. Rabbi Kiva Omer mishiyishla b'chavius. You're right. It's a time when it goes into the barrel. It must be that there's three different opinions. In other words, we're going to make a distinction between yain nesach and meiser. By meiser, no one has this more stringent opinion. However, when it comes to yain nesach, because we're more strict, we have a more strict opinion. Says Rashi, Tani didan salva mashiyar labor. It's wine once it goes into the pit, and therefore it can be considered to be like yain nesach. Rabbanan mishikba babor bekiva mishiyishla. Three opinions. We say no. Maybe that's my yain nesach. But Meiser says Rashi, ikar Rabbanan, ikar bekiva. So it could be like him, like the Rabbanan, or like the shita of Rabbi Akiva. Okay. In other words, either the later stage of Mashiach Babor, or when it's taken out into the Chavias, but not this earlier stage of Mashiach Labor. That earlier stage is only when it comes to Yain Nesach, because we're more strict. But not to say that it's by the dinim of Meiser that it's considered to be like wine, that you cannot drink a chila, a shtias arai. That's the idea. Okay, question 3. Hadoyrech another megas me'masei nasa yayin liyois nesar b'mag akum. So at what point is it considered to be wine? So there's 4 shitas. One is mishihizkeli mashech, which we said is the more strict opinion. As soon as it starts flowing, even if it's on the top, or mishiyar labor, once the wine actually goes into the bottom holding container, the bore, or mishiyikbeh, as we said, a later stage when the peels float to the top, but still in the bore, or mishiyish lebechavius, that when you remove it and bring it to the barrels. Okay, let's continue to Nun Vav Amid Beis. Short daf today. However, according to Rava, he does not make any distinction between Meiser and Yain Nesach. So indeed, he'll say that there's these 3 different Tanoim regarding when something is considered as wine. Okay, let's continue. Unless there's a question. Okay. Ma shebabor aser v'hashar mutter. So our Mishnah said that moylichni mochavis lagas and mavini ilmam nagas. Let's just find where it is. Okay. All right. So this goes back to Nun Hamid Aleph. So it says in Oisei Nesach ad Shior Labor. So that's one opinion. Yor Labor, once the wine goes into the pit, Mash Babor Aser, because that's considered to be already Aser, but if an Akum touches it. However, Shar Mutter, everything which is above, in the gas above, which is not yet in the bore, is mutter. So the bottom is aser, but the stuff which is on the top, there's no chibur, it's not connected, and therefore it's mutter. Okay, so Omer Rav Huna lo shanu, we only say that that's the case, that the top one is okay, el shul hichser gargusni legas. What does that mean? Says Rashi, whose sal gadol, there's this big basket, shekosher b'tzinor, which is tied to the pipe. V'hayayin yarid min atzinor, the wine flows out from the pipe, v'tocho into the basket, u'mitaycha labor, and then from the basket into the bor. Kedei l'tzanin hayayin mizogin u'mechartznayim. So basically, it almost acts as a sieve to be able to go and get everything out. So if you have this gargusni, that separates the top from the bottom. So the top is usher. The top will be mutter, rather. Aval hichser gargusni legas usher. That's only if you did not put it back. But if you returned the strainer into the gas, then, or the basket into the gas, then it's going to be usher. So basically, when you bring the basket back into the press, it makes everything usher because the flow is like a connector, right? So this middle thing connects the top and the bottom. So if it's there, it's this connection which will usher. So the question is, gargusni gufa b'may komisri. How did the basket become usher to therefore say the top will also be usher? After all, it's only benitzuk. It's only because of the flow from the top to the bottom. That's the only reason why maybe the yain nesach will make the basket also usher. So shmamina nitzach chibur. It sounds almost like the flow is an attachment, right? Which is not so pashut, as Rashi says. It's actually a machlokis in seicher sapoil, whether or not we say such a din. That when you flow something, that liquid which is flowing connects the top from the bottom. So is that true? But it wouldn't be right to establish it like that because that's not libid kuli alma. So my answer is kedetanu Reb Chia. What does he say? Shipa chastoi salchusiyai hachinami shipach sasoi biboiroi. So we're talking about where it touched the funnel. Also, we're talking about where there was an overflow by the bore. In other words, says Rashi, Chinis Mali Habor, the bottom, which was holding the wine, got so full, until the wine reached all the way to the top, the tapas b'shuli hagargusni, and it touched the bottom of the basket. So it's not just liquid that's flowing, but the liquid actually came up solid, like full liquid, and it touched the bottom of the basket. So the yain nesach touched the barrel, this basket, and therefore that makes also that which is on the top usher as well. Question 4. Hichsir gargusni lagas, if the strainer, if you will, or this basket, goes back into the gas, im neser mashabagas, will it usher that which is on the top? And what are the studim b'zeh? So one pshat is like this: if it doesn't touch it, the wine on the bottom doesn't touch it, but only through a flow. So that's tolen machlokas, whether nitzo kavi chibur la'aser. Does the flow have the ability to like make a connection the bottom to the top? But if the bottom overflows, if you will, so much that it's touching the basket, then it's going to be aser l'kuliyam on the top. Ahuyanuka. So we have a little story of this person. The Tana Avodah Kachavim b'Shishni, that was taught the dinim of Avodah Zarah at the age of 6. Okay, pretty impressive. Ben Shei Shanim, Rashi says. So Bamine Mahu Lidrech Am im Ha'ovid Kachavim Egas. So what's the din? Are you allowed, now even though our Mishnah said that in the gas, it says, Loichin gas ba'utim in Ovid Kachavim, Afal Pishu Naita Biyadav V'Naisin Tapuach, because it's not an issue, because the top is not yayin yet. So he asked the question, is it an issue of yayin nesach if we're dealing with pressing with an akum? So Malay Darchin Ima Havikacham Bagas. We already know this din from our Mishnah that you can. So v'ha kam nasech biyadei, but it should be also because you're doing. It should be yanesach. Says Rashi, umishnah chreine katani chazru loimer to say the ein darchen. They are not allowed to disreli karab huna shehischelimashe chaviyayin. That even while it's in the gas, but it's already starting to flow in a downward slope, at that point it already becomes yain nesach. Answers the sarni lahu liyade, that the akam's hands were basically tied behind their back. So therefore, it's allowed in that case because it's impossible for them to touch it because their hands were behind their back. I have a common nasech beregel, but the akam is touching it with their feet. So in this we have the famous answer that nisach haregel lo shmei nisuch. It's only when an akam touches it with their hands, but not with their feet. Hahu uvda. There's a story to Havim Radah. Didashi Yisrael v'chachamim lahu chamra, that they were threshing together. V'shaya Shmuel tlasa ragli, and Shmuel waited 3 regolim, which is the holidays of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, when people learn those particular subjects. Now, my taima. So in this case too, the akam's hands were tied behind his back. So what was going on? Ilay mimishim deksavar. We continue to Nun Zayin and Aleph. De'i mishkachna tana de aser krem nosin. If I could find someone that will aser just like the sheet of Rav Nosin, then usrine. Then I'm going to aser afil bahana, this wine. Says Rashi, yain bahana. B'magri shlo v'chacham. The fact that an akam touched it. Alpha bi shlo noschu avodas kachavim. Even though it's not yain nesach, the nisach lo havi iser hana el alidei shichshuch. So in this case, it wasn't done intentionally, and it was not done biyad. But nonetheless, he was trying to find a shita to find a way to aser this wine, to sanya. Muddu, if the akam measured the wine of a Jew, ben biyad ben beregel, not only by hand, as Rashi says, shehichnis yada v'zar l'saychai l'shar kamiyayin yishma, he put his hands in there to figure it out, or ben beregel, or even with his feet, right? Umachar, Rav Nasan Omer biyad aser beregel mutter. The din is that it's not a problem if it was beregel. The whole shaila is if it was done biyad. So he says biyad aser beregel is mutter. So Rav Nasan, and this is the stringency of Rav Nasan. Rav Nasan says it's aser. So Rav Nasan biyad beregel miyamar. So because according to him, it's not an issue. So if we look at Rashi, Yimacher tikivan do neschavin lo nasach. You can sell it because his intention was not to make it to yain nesach. It's a machlokes only if it's mutter bahana, but they both hold it's aser b'shtia mishum chasnus. So Ella dimishkachna tana deshari krav shimin deshari afil b'shtia. I was actually looking to matter it, not that I was trying to aser it even bahana. I was trying to matter it like the shita of Rav Shimon. Says Rashi, deshari maga shlo v'kachavim shlo nischaven l'nasech. If he didn't have the intentions, it was without kavana, so then he's lenient even to drink it. So that was the reason why he delayed, not because he was trying to find someone to aser it, even bahana, but to find someone who was mekel, just like the sheet Rav Shimon. We're going to stop here. We did question 4. TA 8. Madua hitter hahu yanuka. Why did we allow this kid lidreich im akom begas? Why aren't we afraid? So, because biyad siyar niliyade, because their hands were tied behind their back. Uberegel nisuch, the regel ushmei nisuch. And as we said, touching it with the feet is not considered to be nisuch. Question TB10. Madu hitra ho yanuka. Exactly the same question as TA8 is TB10. So let's just mark this down. TB10. So ha'im heim koishrin es hayadayim shel akam hu yochel hegub yadayim v'negibur gayim lo chashiv maga lo chashiv klum. Ad kan.